Welcome back to another episode of Red Tinted Glasses, the Aberdeen Football Club podcast that hosts not only dodgy moustaches, but dodgy Aberdeen opinions as well. Thank you to Jason Campbell for that feedback on last week's show. There should have been three of us on the show, but unfortunately Callum's Wi-Fi was not playing ball, so it is just me, myself, Glenn, and Phil. Phil, welcome back to the show. How are you doing this week?
Not too bad. Yeah, not too bad. Starting to get a little bit excited for the season now, at least. So yeah, and the mustache is here to stay. So I'm not taking the slander.
What about the man bun?
The man bun doesn't exist. It was a hairband. It was an unfortunate angle of a hairband.
Oh, yes, I know. Well, that's how slow things have been for us on a footballing front that we've been resulted to speaking about hairstyles because the Dons are back this week. Club football is back and competitive football as well. Or for those heading up to Peterhead on Wednesday, the first pre-season friendly, it feels like, because I think the Dons have only played two bounce games. I think they played an Club 11 match over in Portugal. I think plans for the pre-season game fell through, and there was a behind closed door game at Cormack Park, but nothing's really kind of come out against who that was against or what was the score. So we've not really had anything to get our teeth stuck into, Phil. But for those with Red TV, the club have been putting out some excellent content over the course of the week that the Dons have been in Portugal, with some really fascinating interviews with Dante Polvara, Leighton Clarkson, amongst others, really kind of giving an insight into what life's been like in Portugal. As the players sharing villas, so it's been 3 or 4 to a room, which is hopefully enhancing the team bonding. And there's been some really obviously funny clips that the club have been posting on a regular morning with the players on their way to whether it be lunch or breakfast. So, from a fan's point of view, it's great for us to be able to get some sort of insight into that, Phil, but hopefully also from a fan's point of view, we see the benefits of this later on in the season with the team spirit and also, more importantly, I guess, the performances on the pitch.
Yeah, I think the social media content the club's been putting out has been, a sort of breath of fresh air. And it kind of gives us, like you say, a bit more of an insight. And the players, insight to their personality. I think we all know there's plenty of characters there, but to sort of have that on a sort of front and center is quite good. Even things like the alternative fixture announcement that they did with the sort of memes in it was pretty good. But no, hopefully it is, like you say, it's a sign of a bit more of a team bond, and it will really reflect on the pitch. I do wish that the long form content was available free. If you're a cheapskate like myself, who's not going to pay for Red TV, but even the snippets that have been put out on Twitter has been it's sort of made a miserable morning a little bit better at times.
Yeah, no, definitely. And I think, we're gonna, as fans, it gets you, as you mentioned there, being that excitement levels raising as the season approaches. But the hard work was being done, of course, on the pitch, double sessions in what all the players and management have come out and said was a really extreme heat. And I read the article in the Evening Express. I know Ryan Krill kind of promoted that. I think Sean Wallace wrote the article where one of the training sessions included the ball not being allowed to be passed backwards, and a lot of kind of tactical work maybe being allowed to be done away from Cormack Park and away from, we've not exactly had the best weather. We're recording this on Monday night, and those that live within the Aberdeen area will have known what a miserable day it was. So if the players were back at Cormack Park today, I'm sure they would have been wishing they were back in Portugal. But hopefully it's been a chance for Jimmy to impart his knowledge and get some ideas across in a more relaxed environment. I think for me, the kind of last interview that he did was something that came across where, the players are in an area where they have to be with their teammates. They're not rushing to training. They're not rushing home to their families. Everything is that bit more relaxed. But what I would love to see on Red TV is the quiz night that the players had. I think they had that on Thursday. It was an hour-long quiz. That would definitely be good social media content if that got released.
Yeah, no, and I think, like you say as well, I think it's just as important that Jimmy's around the squad as much as possible. Obviously having dinner together, breakfast, lunch, on the pitch, even just going about. I'm pretty sure it was a golf resort as well. I know a lot of the lads are keen golfers, whether Jimmy and his coaching staff are as well, I don't know. But, just having those experiences together as a new coach, it really does help sort of bridge that gap, sort of between a new coach and an already, for the most part, existing squad base.
Yeah, and of course also helps both Dimitar Mitov and Gavin Malloy to integrate the squad. Obviously a shame that Peter Ambrose could not make it. If we look at towards the footballing side, because obviously we don't want to exactly talk about Holiday all the podcast, the Dons haven't, to our knowledge, played a lot of football as we head towards the first competitive game of the season against Queen of the South, which I've got a preview of towards the end of this episode. What would be your hopes then for the game against Peterhead on Wednesday night? Are you looking for that style that Jimmy's implemented? Are you looking for fitness, a result, a bit of everything? What would you say people should be looking for come Wednesday night?
I think really it is a bit of everything. I think at the end of the day, it's a friendly and we shouldn't really take too much from it. The team that goes out is more than likely not going to be the team that Jimmy would feel is the strongest team. I think we'll see a bit of that style, but I think for the most part, as pre-season tends to be, it'll be minutes in the legs. Obviously unlimited subs as well. You'll probably have a completely different 11 in the second half, even switching keepers. So, it's not really a game I think we should look too much into in any means. Even the outcome, I'm pretty sure this is part of a testimonial, is it not, for Ryan Strachan, is it?
I'm not sure. I know his testimonial was at the weekend against Fraserburgh, so unless he's having two.
Okay. No, that's fine. I must have picked that up wrong. But yeah, it's not something I would really be looking too much into in terms of sort of where we are going to be come Queen of the South on the 13th.
And obviously you've got players like Bojan Miovski and Jamie McGrath who had an extra week off, like so Bojan joining up with the squad once they were in Portugal. So, maybe you speak about obviously switching teams at the 45-minute mark. You could see maybe the likes of Jamie and Bojan given a little bit longer, given they've had a week's less time on the training pitch. The one thing I'm interested to see, unfortunately, both of us aren't making the game on Wednesday, but what I am interested to see is where Leighton Clarkson plays on Wednesday night, and if that gives us an indication to where he'll play throughout the season. It might be hard to read into, as you say, given we might not be necessarily starting the game with our best 11. But that interview that he did with Red TV, where he said during his time at Liverpool, his best position was in the 6 or in the 8. But when he went to Blackburn, when you didn't get the ball as much, he preferred being in the number 10 role. And kind of brings us back to last season where there felt like there was a lot of debate amongst the Aberdeen support where Leighton Clarkson was best suited. I remember Barry Robson quoting him as the quarterback. And at the start of the season, everybody felt that the ball it was quite obvious it was continuously going over Leighton Clarkson's head, where we should have been using him as kind of a key playmaker within that squad. A few people also thought he was better just off of Bojan Miovski in that 10 role. So I'm kind of really keen to see where Jimmy Tillene sees him through the course of this season, and maybe we'll get that indication not only on Wednesday but equally in Saturday evening's game against Queen of the South.
Yeah, it's a tough one because I think he's a very versatile player in what Jimmy would really want to do. I mean, we've seen it when he is playing in the 10. If he gets the ball in the box, he can be a clinical finisher just as well as he is a creative player for setting up chances. But equally, we've spoken quite a lot about this sort of quick, get the ball forward style that Jimmy has, and having him deeper and having a player of his quality spraying the passes out early is equally as beneficial to this team as it is having him, creating and scoring chances up the top end. So, no, I think you're right. I think it will be really interesting to see sort of how his role develops, because I think it will be a little bit of trial and error as well, and it'll be situational to games. So I think it'll be good to see how he develops under Jimmy this season.
Yeah, and again, those that have watched that full interview on Red TV will know that that point you've just made there, Phil, was one he made himself about it kind of depends on the opposition, where maybe he's better suited as well. But one thing he's definitely keen to improve on this season is his assists, because he feels he should have had a lot more, or he should have had a lot more contributions, whether it be in assists or goals. So good to see he knows that side of his game maybe needs improving, or certainly a game he personally wants to improve, I should say. So yeah, certainly those interviews are very exciting and get you pumped for the season ahead. I'll maybe slip you my Red TV logins and you can go back and get yourself pumped for the season this weekend.
That would be ideal, and also a little bit of a breaking news there that away kit's launching on Tuesday at 9 p.m.
Oh, absolutely ideal. And the B indicated there, black and yellow, going to be the two colours of the kit as well. I know we'd already discussed that kind of privately, knowing that, and I think also from the little snippet that the club have put out as well, the little picture that they've done on the tweet. I don't know how well this is going to work for those watching on YouTube. There's a little diagonal lines for the black and yellow. Again, a little maybe insight into what the kit will look like. But without any kind of real transfers or preseason games to look back at, Phil, we're maybe a bit struggling for content, some may think. But what we're going to do on the episode today is go through the Q&A. This is what I have to do as part of the 442 preview. And I've taken 4 or 5 sample questions from that I filled in on behalf of my personal opinion on the season ahead. Those that purchase 442 will be able to see my thoughts in that. But we were hoping to do both yourself and Callum, but as we said, unfortunately, Callum's Wi-Fi was not holding enough to maintain a solid kind of episode for him to feature. So we're just going to get your opinions on this. And at least you'd actually done this element of the homework. I think it would have been a bit of a struggle for Callum, you'd have admitted himself. So the first question that 442 asks is, the big talking point is, and then your answer, please.
Well, see, I was kind of torn between two, because I think there's 2 big talking points for us this season. I think obviously the biggest one is obviously Jimmy's first season and just how he adapts to Scottish football, and whether miraculously a foreign manager with not stale, outdated ideas can actually give us a little bit of progress, which I'm hoping is the case. I think the other one as well is whether Bojan stays, because I think that could be a real defining factor for our season, and especially in the instance if we do lose him, if we lose him late on, whether we manage to replace him. Because I think if we lose him late and don't replace him, that'll have a big knock-on effect for us. It'll be putting a lot of weight on Sockler, Pap, Ambrose. It'll be putting a lot of weight on them. So I think a really big story would be if we manage to keep a hold of Bojan. I think everyone, I mean me included, is basically written off the fact that he's away. So yeah, I think that'd be quite an interesting point.
Yeah, well, shout out to Skoksker at this point. I know we're obviously not doing this live, but he'll probably be jumping into the comments saying that he's adamant Bojan is staying. And that's actually, a very interesting point as a big talking point, Phil, something I hadn't kind of considered. I was definitely more leaning towards your first point there about the fact it being Jimmy's first season in charge. Second question then, and of course, if you are watching on YouTube, why don't you leave us your thoughts as we go along with these questions? Or if you're listening and follow us on social media, more so Twitter at @RTG_podcast. If you don't follow us there, tweet us your thoughts as well in relation to these answers. It's always great to hear the various opinions that we've got. This season will be different because, Phil?
I think not having Europe will make it really different this season. I think we saw, the impact it had on us last year. I think obviously that wasn't helped by our thin squad and the sort of injuries that we did sort of have to contend with. But I think not having Europe this season, if we can sort of focus on matters at home and really sort of push for a bit more consistency compared to last year, I think that's going to be, the big difference we're going to see this year.
Yeah, I think I agree on that consistency at home, especially. I think we spoke about that either on the last episode or a couple episodes ago about making Pittodrie that fortress, which we didn't quite manage last season. I can't actually remember what I put as my answer for that question. So we'll move on to the third question that I set you. Our key player for this season will be.
I think this is probably a bit of a consensus between all three of us, but I'm saying Polvara. I just think, like I said before about Clarkson's ability to get a ball forward quick. I think we saw a lot of our positivity last year was when Polvara did come on the pitch, and he was willing to just hit balls into the channel at the earliest opportunity. And I think, judging by what we've seen in pre-season, notice that we're not looking at the squad numbers too much, but the fact he's been given the 8, and just the sort of leaps and bounds he came on last season, I think he's going to just go from strength to strength, and hopefully be given, more of a starter's role, and really just, like I said, just come on leaps and bounds and get us going forward.
Yeah, no, I think you're absolutely right. It's a consensus between the three of us. And maybe a bit of a cliche here, or certainly a big phrase, but he could potentially be that linchpin in our midfield and pivotal to how Jimmy wants to set us up. I'm really excited to see how he thrives. Hopefully he thrives under Jimmy's setup. And again, probably an insight into those that haven't been able to watch the full interview on Red TV that he did. He mentions the fact that he's got the number 8 jersey. So I know obviously I was mentioned on the last episode, we can't read too much into it, but by all accounts, he will be wearing number 8. Vinny Bazowin in one of the videos calls him DP8. I know that's a phrase you and Callum are definitely going to use till the cows come home. But he speaks about the kind of honor, I guess maybe in inverted commas slightly, because players when he was growing up, he looked up to, such as Frank Lampard, Stevie Gerrard, that he kind of modelled his game on, all wore number 8. So for him to have the number 8 jersey means a lot. The jersey he was wearing last season was his lucky number, but he's delighted to have that number 8 kind of going forward for this season. Fourth question then. The question when you get sent it from 442, it just says "look out for?" ? But obviously, I've said to you, this is a young player or another player maybe making a breakthrough for the course of this season. So, if we're looking at young player, who would you be looking out for this season?
Again, obvious ones, Fletcher Boyd. I think just seeing how much game time he gets this year. Alternatively, you'd maybe look at Alfie Stewart as well. Again, to see if he maybe features. But I think the big one is Fletch, just with signing the new deal, and just his sort of burst onto the scene at the tail end of last season, and sort of how you phrased the question as well with or another player. Also, again, like we've spoken about in most podcasts, from last season to this is Vinny Bissowin. Again, he's another one along with Clarkson and Polvara that I think the role that he might develop under Jimmy, I think will be interesting to see, but I also think be quite important, especially if we do look to try and go for more width. And by all accounts, he seems, like himself. And the footage we've seen coming out of training over in Portugal, it seems like his sort of smiley, happy self, but also everyone sort of said he's just been training immensely well. I think Sean Wallace had said in that article that Vinny just looked so sharp. Don't know if that's maybe a part of his playoff run with Emin, but it seems to be a lot of praise for Vinny coming out of Portugal. So hopefully a big season back in red for him.
Yeah, I put in another player in case Callum was joining us because I knew that he would bring that up. As I said, it is kind of more aimed towards the younger players, and I think the first two that you pulled out are for me the obvious ones to name. More so on Alfie Stewart because I'm interested / excited to see if he's afforded a first team chance this season. I guess behind them, you're also looking at Finlay Marshall, who went to Edinburgh City and had quite a decent spell over there, albeit in a team that did struggle in the league. And then I guess a player that maybe doesn't get as much kind of commentary, given his age and the fact that he's been in and around the first team a lot, would be Jack Milne. How much of a chance will he be afforded next season? contesting that right back area right now with Nicky Devlin and Jaden Richardson, of course, returned from his loan spell as well. So maybe a wee little mention there to Jack and whether or not he'll get minutes as well. And then this is maybe a bit of a cruel question to end this segment on, but it's thrown into 4-4-2's part as well. I won't be happy unless
the price of pies comes down at Pittodrie is the main one. On a more serious note, like we said before, I think improve home form and reclaim third, I think is a big thing. I know we can't, put too much expectation. We've got to have a bit of patience with Jimmy coming in, but I think, he seems like a very high caliber coach. And I think we've got a squad good enough to get us back on track. Obviously, Hearts, Kelly, all that, having Europe, probably sap out their legs a little bit. Same thing that happened to us. So yeah, improved home form, reclaim third, and Davy brings down the price of Pittodrie pie.
Well, that's definitely not the way I'd gone at it, but we'll see if the kiosks at AFC are listening and listen to your feedback. I know this podcast is known for its pie reviews, more so from Callum than myself. But yeah, just thought without much football to talk about, we would diversify a little bit and throw in a bit of Q&A. So as we said, let us know your thoughts. Well, Phil, there is another kind of matter to speak about, I guess, because as we said, we're recording this on Monday evening, and yesterday, Sunday the 7th of July, former Aberdeen defender Andy Considine announced his retirement from football. The Bankery Beckenbauer, the fourth highest appearance holder for the club, 571 appearances, 41 goals, League Cup winner, of course, as well, and three-time Player of the Year winner. Sad announcement, I guess, for many, and some may point to that be the reason why Callum's not actually on the show tonight.
Yeah, I think he's drowning his sorrows somewhere. But no, I think, I don't think we can doubt what a servant he was during his time at Aberdeen. It's a shame the way it did sort of come to an end and sort of sour notes in the media and stuff. But from the experiences I've had meeting him, out and about and at events and whatnot, he's just a genuinely nice bloke. For people of like my age, especially, you do tend to think of him and Russell Anderson. I wasn't privileged to be alive during the Willie Miller days. So, like Anderson and Considine have always just been absolute, gods to me. As you can tell from, oh no, you weren't there when I embarrassed myself in front of Russell Anderson at Player of the Year, but Callum will attest to the fact I embarrassed myself in front of Russell Anderson. But yeah, just a genuinely nice bloke, and he did live each and every one of our dreams. So no, hopefully whatever comes next from him's fulfilling, whether it's coaching or another business avenue.
Yeah, and whether that kind of coaching avenue remains within the Aberdeen area, albeit at the club, or another, who knows, maybe it is, as you say, another business avenue and a break away from football. As I said, fourth highest appearance holder for the club, some notable goals, some notable games he played in as well. So you've got that Dens Park hat-trick, the goal on the final day against Celtic, which helped to secure second place, the header in Rijeka. Those of us that were there in Rijeka that night will know not only how good a bounce it was, but how good a performance it was, and kind of made that trip. You've got the header at Fir Park that night as part of our League Cup winning run as well. You've got goals against Rangers at Pittodrie thrown in there as well. Loads of memories that I'm sure many of you will have. Of course, there's the memorable Stag Do video that gave the national team the now unofficial anthem as well. But what would be one of your favourite memories of Consi, Phil?
Yeah, I mean, I think obviously the big one's the hat-trick at Dens. I think that was just insanity, and if anyone had a bet on that, then fair play. But I think one for me, it's maybe not as big a focal point as example Dens, but I think away to Killie in the Scottish Cup replay, the 4-3 in extra time, obviously scored the header to make it 1-1, and then it was his cross that inadvertently deflected in to make it 4-3. And it was just utter chaos. And it was just, it was probably the highs of that sort of season. And I think as well that the hair revival has to be spoken about as a highlight as well. I don't know how he pulled it off. It was very Scott Brown-esque in the way that I just assumed he was bald at like 19 by choice. But yeah, so no, like I say, I think he's been at the club so long that I think everybody would have almost a completely different highlight for the most part. Which I think again is just a testament to his longevity as well, and just how established he was in our team and sort of becoming the mature centre back he became towards the latter stages.
Yeah, and look, obviously people have positive memories. I can just feel that one of my best pals, Finlay, is probably listening in Perth, Australia. His work just now is probably thinking of the countless penalties he conceded against Celtic as well. So, of course, both sides of the argument there as well. But as you say, he's a player that gave a lot to the football club, 23 years from youth academy right through to first team. Unfortunately, kind of towards the end of his time at Aberdeen, it didn't end the best. We won't get too much into him leaving the club, but I was more looking at the 21-22 season when he scored in that trip to Haken, home game against Haken, and then got injured in Azerbaijan on that horrendous pitch against Karabakh that pretty much ruled out his season. But despite all that, he still belatedly became one of the oldest debutants for the national team, getting that cap. And I don't know if this is an official stat or not, but I feel like it should be. Only player to have 3 stats and keep three clean sheets as well. I'm so glad that he managed to get that international recognition, because it's always kind of viewed as when you play for Aberdeen, it's difficult to earn that recognition. I mean, I'm sure Russell Anderson will attest for that as well.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think, and again, like you say, it was just a bit of a David Nugent moment. One cap, 1 goal for Nugent, 3 games, 3 clean sheets for Concy. The glue that got us to the Euros.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And of course, then he brought the anthem along as well. And as you say, kind of a down to earth guy. He was a really nice guy to kind of chat to briefly in Cologne as well. Made time for anyone that was asking him for photos outside that pub as well. Nothing was too much for him as well. So, all the best to him in his retirement and whatever the future holds. And as I said to him on LinkedIn today, the offer still stands for an appearance on RTG. So we'll watch this space. Well, away from Andy Considine, Phil, we'll look towards the upcoming competitive fixture, the first competitive fixture of the Jimmy Talleen era and the 24-25 season for the Dons. It's a trip to Palmerston to face Queen of the South in the League Cup. Coming up shortly is a preview of the game with Finlay Jack, who used to work as a media manager within the club and matchday commentator as well. But we'll take a look at the Aberdeen side of things before we hear from Finlay. And over the last few days, it's kind of been debated on social media about the state or current state of the Aberdeen squad. Are we ready for the League Cup group stages? Are we not? Is the squad too thin? Is it ready to go? I can't believe some people do think that the squad is fine as is. We definitely need additions in a few positions, in my opinion. What's your current thoughts then on the squad first and foremost? And the squad as is, would you be confident enough for that squad to get us through the League Cup group stages? You're not panicking yet that there aren't signings in the door at this moment in time, or more signings than there is currently?
Yeah, no, I think we are still a bit light in terms of the overall squad. There's still plenty of time, obviously, for signings to come in. My foot mob did flash up to say we were apparently signing someone there, but I've got no idea about that. But yeah, I think there's still plenty of time. I don't think people should be getting too stressed yet and too worried. I've seen a lot of stuff going on about how dry the rumour mill's been and this, that, and the next thing. I think that's kind of, arguably a good sign. I feel like so much of our business is always out in the open, which causes things to get poached or, deals don't work out and then people get even more frustrated. Sort of a here's what you could have one moment. So I'm hopeful that there's, behind closed doors, there's a lot of work going on to sort of flesh out that squad. Like we said previously, I think we really struggled with depth last season. which, obviously wasn't helped by having to play in Europe on a thin squad. So I'd like to see some more signs. I think it should be good enough. No disrespect to any of the teams in our group, but I think the group of players we've got should be good enough to see us through the group stages pretty comfortably. I would like to think. So I'm not sweating too much yet.
I wonder if the notification you got was for Jacopo Manconi from Modena.
That was.
Someone just DM'd me the same thing, that he's coming from Modena to Aberdeen. So I'm guessing they got the same notification as you because it's just a screenshot.
Yeah, flashed up whilst we're speaking about Constantine. I'm not sure it'll probably come up on the video of me looking very perplexed at the top of my phone. That's what I'm recording on. I think it was like 238k. And I was like, what's that about?
Yeah, so well, at least we can say we've discussed it if it gets announced between now and next week's episode. But
I just look like a really massive oracle on a Monday predicting this signing out of nowhere.
But no, I think right now where we are with the squad, I agree. The squad currently should have more than enough to get us through this League Cup group stage, with the greatest of respect to those teams that we're coming up against in the stages. But I can't help but feel, in terms of the league campaign and the rest of the season, we certainly do need to strengthen. Whatever I just called him, I've forgotten already.
Was it Marconi?
Jacopo Manconi, yeah, you were right, Manconi. Good to see you remember these things. Is the answer up front if that means Duke's away? Interesting, we spoke there about the right back. You've got Richardson, Milne, Devlin. Do we need all three? Will Milne maybe move into more of a central defender? Who knows? Of course, he also had time briefly as a midfielder as well. Other players maybe with question marks around them, what their future holds for the club as well. And I'm sure Jimmy's still eager to add to that current squad as well, and he's certainly been quoted as wanting to add players to, and things are working on, but they need time and people need to be patient, which is easier said than done when you're dealing with Aberdonians. But I think certainly over the next 2 to 3 weeks we should be fine. But then, of course, the legitimate concern, Phil, would be that these players aren't coming in and being able to integrate with the squad and get match fitness, which of course again is a feasible concern.
Yeah, I mean, it's one of those things. In an ideal world, would have everybody in the door first day of the transfer window opening, and give them a full pre-season, and hit the ground running come match day one. If you can find any club in the world that's ever able to pull that off, then give their business model to us, please, because that's very impressive. But no, I don't think we should be getting too nervous yet. Like you say, I think Jimmy seems like a very calm, composed, but also a very reserved kind of guy. I think he plays cards quite close to his chest. I've got no doubts that he's probably, given Dave and Alan his list of players that he quite likes the look of. Our head of recruitment's probably chalked up a short list of random Italians from Modena. So, like I say, I wouldn't be sweating too much yet. It's a long season. We've got the group stages. If players come in, between Saturday and the sort of following weekend, there's still plenty group stage games to allow them to get those minutes into legs in a maybe less high intense environment. So yeah, no, I'm not worrying too much yet. Ask me in 2 weeks and
I'll ask you ahead of the Dumbarton game and we'll see what your thoughts are. But as I said, we've got a clip with Finlay Jack's coming up, and those that listen to the show that maybe work within the Aberdeen business community will maybe be familiar with Finlay's name or Finlay's work. He hosts the Chamber Talk podcast as part of the Aberdeen Grampian Chamber of Commerce, and those within the business community that were at the business lunch, business breakfast at the Markliff last week. It was Finlay that was hosting the event alongside Jimmy Talleen and Alan Burrows as well. And Finlay said to me, I can't remember if it's during the recording or if it was before, that Jimmy came across with such an aura and a person that clearly demanded respect. And the way he kind of spoke to the room, and I've seen it mentioned by a few people that were present at the event as well. the way Jimmy spoke, you could tell people would sit up and listen to, and kind of hearing that excites you as a fan, let alone I'm sure a player. And again, hearing from Jamie McGrath, Dante, and Leighton in their interviews on Red TV, all speaking so positively about the new manager. I mean, no one's exactly going to come out and say shite right now. But I think for me, kind of hearing this positivity just shows maybe some of the negativity that they had to, well, everybody but Peter leaving last season. I'll leave it there to see who you're going to think that they're speaking about.
But I think the thing is as well, what I get from Jimmy is he commands respect, but I think he gets so much respect because he shows the exact same back. I feel previous managers have maybe been a bit of a soft touch, and they've allowed themselves to kind of be walked over a little bit. Glass perhaps was maybe just not firm enough with the squad of players. Then you go conversely to Goodwin and Robson, who I think went too hard, from things that have came out in media, rumours, that sort of spiral around and stuff, maybe they were just too hard on the group of players to the point where it was disrespectful and it was hard to kind of give them that respect back. And everything I've sort of seen from sort of the media Jimmy's done, but also from what's come out, like you say, from the big business breakfast and stuff, is that he seems like a genuinely, quite nice guy, really respectful, but it's got to kind of be earned a little bit.
Totally. From a team selection point of view, we've obviously spoken about the Peterhead game and maybe not seeing the strongest 11 start that game. Obviously, depending when you're listening to this podcast, if you're on your way to Peterhead on Wednesday, this maybe remains relevant. If you're listening to this after the game on Wednesday, there's maybe going to be some talk a bit different, depending, of course, what happens. Injuries, touch wood, there isn't any. How do you think we line up for the game on Saturday? Bojan Miovski, obviously, we've talked about him on this show. Obviously, currently still an Aberdeen player. I fully expect to see him starting. I expect Jimmy to treat these games with the utmost respect that they absolutely deserve. And I would expect us to be lining up with the strongest possible starting 11 and maybe a little bit of a starting 11 with an indication to how we would line up against St Johnstone when the Premiership season kicks off.
Yeah, no, I'm with you. I've got no doubts that Jimmy's going to treat these games very seriously. I think it is very much, like you say, injury and fitness dependent.
Plastic pitch, of course.
Yeah, so it's quite a big one to see, whose body's holding up the best. Sort of after Wednesday, but also, who isn't wanting to be risked if they are. Like I say, Ruby maybe is still carrying a bit of his knock. Who knows? There's not really been much said about where he's at. As far as I'm aware, he did full training whilst they were away. So
yeah,
it's probably a good sign. But I think as well, I mean, Queen of the South have got a couple of good players in their squad. So, that could cause a little bit of, a problem. I sort of look at, is it Harry Cochrane that used to be at Hearts? I believe he's at Queen of the South. Kai Kennedy as well, that was kind of quite highly spoken of when he was at Rangers.
Yeah.
So, there's players who can cause trouble. I think it's McIntosh as well, used to be at Cove, the striker. So, there's done my research.
Giving away the preview before it's even started.
I know, done my research, mate. But no, there's players there that can cause problems. And I think, if we do go out with a really inexperienced squad, or a squad that isn't, kind of up to the occasion, treating it just as like a bounce game, it could be in for a spot baller. So no, I would like to see as full strength as we can go under the various circumstances that could transpire between now and Saturday.
Yeah, and of course, with the game being live on TV, it's a 5:15 kickoff. Live on Premier Sports TV, 5:15 kickoff in the UK. Obviously, we've got folk that listen in America, Australia, and across the world. I'm not going to try and work out all the various time zones right now.
You're going to have to do the Aberdeen European football, the Ho Chi Minh Reds.
Yeah. But obviously, I'm sure Premier Sports, when picking that, would have been looking for an upset as well. So I want to give, before we go into the preview, obviously thanks to you, Phil, for joining me on the first part of the show as well, but also thanks to the host of the Scottish Football Podcast, Andrew Slavin. If you haven't listened or watched, they are on YouTube as well, the Scottish Football Show, please do check them out. They are an excellent podcast that cover the whole of Scottish football and don't just solely focus on the top two, which is why I personally enjoy them so much. It was Andrew that recommended Finlay for this. And we recorded this on Monday lunchtime. Both of us were at our respective works. And I mentioned we have listeners from across the world, many who have maybe emigrated from Aberdeen. I would say I would apologise for some of the seagull noises you might hear through the podcast or the next 10-minute clip, but it might make you feel a little bit reminiscing of home. So without further ado, let's hear Finlay Jack's thoughts on the weekend's game as the Dons head to Palmerston to face Queen of the South. Welcome to the show. Good to have you on.
Thanks for having me.
It's always nice to hear from the opposition, and even more so when we delve into the lower league. So thanks again to Andrew Slavin for the recommendation, and someone that is close connected to Queen of the South as well, but now lives up in the Granite City. So probably going to have either bragging rights or not hear the end of it come next weekend. I'm definitely hoping for the latter, Finlay. I'm apologising now, but I'm going to look back on last season because I think last season might give us a bit of an insight into the game this weekend. Queen of the South finishing 7th in the league. A disappointing season, I think you would probably agree on. Obviously delighted to avoid that relegation playoff. But what went so wrong for Queen of the South last season?
I think it was probably more relief than delight. We should never have been 7th anyway. I think that league, there's only 3 or 4 full-time teams last year, and you really should be looking at the top end of the table. I think we just lacked any consistency in team selection, and I'm wary of criticising Marvin Bartley too much because he was dealt a really tough hand with injuries. The squad was very young by design, I think. Our most experienced player was Effie Ambrose, who turned up late once or twice to games, I think, so wasn't overly disciplined. So we struggled with injuries throughout. I think in the lower leagues, really, you rely on a bit of physicality as well as technical ability. And, we had some really technically gifted players, a few of which have went on to bigger and better things. We just lacked much physicality, especially in midfield. And when you look at our record against teams in leagues above, we were pretty decent against championship sides. I think we won 3 and lost 1. We beat Dundee United in the Scottish Cup. We beat Partick Thistle, who were in the playoffs, obviously. So a decent record against teams in leagues above, but we really struggled against teams that were bigger and stronger than us. And hopefully, judging by the early signings that Peter Murphy has made, that's going to change this season.
Yeah, so you mentioned Peter Murphy. He's one of the number of changes that have kind of occurred at Palmerston over the summer. We'll speak about the manager first then. He's come in to replace Marvin Bartley. Peter Murphy, a name familiar to Aberdeen and this competition, of course. A few seasons ago, his Annan side took us to extra time before the Dons prevailed 4-1. What are you expecting from Peter Murphy this season?
Discipline, hard to beat, I think. He plays a decent style of football. But generally coming up against Annan, it was never an easy game against them. You knew you would have to work for your goals. And the signings he's made, I think it'll be similar this season for Queens. Where we are just now, I think we're maybe a striker in a winger short. Certainly, if you look at our preseason results, which we might talk about, we struggle to find a goal, other than a trouncing of a South of Scotland team, Abbeyvale. We've really struggled in front of net. But I think we'd just like to see Queens a bit harder to beat. It's been all too easy for opposition teams over the past 3 years. Our record at home is dreadful, actually. And when you think of it, you're coming to a plastic pitch, more often than not, you're travelling, 60 plus miles for the vast majority of teams. It really shouldn't be as easy as it has been for teams coming to Palmerston. So I think we'd all like to see that change this season.
Yeah, and I think that's, something with the game this weekend in mind, that probably that banana skin will be thrown about between now and the weekend. The distance, I'm sure, will be mentioned, and the pitch as well. You got it in there as well. We've mentioned it plenty of times on the podcast last season about both the likes of Livingston and Kilmarnock having plastic pitches and what advantage that brings to the home side when Aberdeen travel. And, up till kind of the last couple of seasons, we don't exactly have the best record on the plastic surface, and I'm sure that will be something that the Queens will look to utilise this weekend. But it's not just the dugout that's seen change over the summer, Finlay. It's 15 players that have left the club from last season. I think it would be 17, but obviously 2 of your loanees in Jay Hogarth and Oscar McIntyre have returned. That's why I've gone for 15. 7 new signings in the door. Kai Kennedy and Leighton McIntosh, the latter probably a bit more familiar to those viewers and listeners from up here, of course, both spending time at Cove and Arbroath. For me, those 2 names kind of stood out as decent additions. Is it going to be tough for you guys this season, again, with that huge squad turnover and going into your first competitive game of the season against an Aberdeen side?
Yeah, it will be, but to be honest, 15 outgoings is a quiet summer for Queen of the South, or it certainly feels like that over the past. To be fair, actually, the past couple of seasons it's been less bad, but it's normally a fairly decent turnover. This season, though, I think they're opting, the management team, to go on a slightly smaller squad, maybe favouring quality over quantity, and we've got some decent young players too, who will do more than just fill a spot on the bench, hopefully. But as you said, Kai Kennedy is the one that really excites players, or fans, sorry. His record just at Palmerston for opposition is pretty good. He's given our right back, it was Willie Gibson once, actually, I remember, on BBC against Inverness at a torrid time. He's maybe not quite reached the heights people expected of him, but I'm sure he's keen to really find some form again with us, and hopefully we see the best of him. McIntosh, as you say, an experienced striker. We've got to replace Gavin Riley, who was well in double figures for goals last season, and Rory Payton a couple of years before that. So there's a bit of pressure on him, and we've only really got McIntosh up front, along with Kyle Docherty, who does a role, but he doesn't score a load of goals. So a lot of signings from Annan too. Peter Murphy's brought a couple of midfielders that he's worked with before, a couple of defenders. So he knows them well. Whether they can, improve on where they've been the past couple of seasons, only time will tell. But there's a sense of optimism around some of the signings. They've really impressed at Annan, and you'd like to think getting to work with the management team on a full-time basis and train on a full-time basis, they'll hopefully jump up to that next level.
And hopefully you guys reap the benefits of that through the league campaign and not so much this weekend. With the season as a whole, obviously we're going to speak about Saturday in a bit more detail in a second, but it'd be interesting for those that, a lot of people that do listen to this podcast follow Scottish football throughout the divisions. What would be your hopes for Queens this season? As you touched on, pre-season hasn't exactly been prolific, apart from beating Abbey Vale 7-0. The last 2 games, you had Stirling Albion at the weekend. Last 2 games haven't scored. 3 defeats. It was Clyde, Morton and Stirling Albion, those defeats. But are you reading a lot into that? Because a lot of people do kind of dismiss pre-season as just a fitness exercise.
Yeah. And I've read more into previous pre-seasons when we've been beating championship teams and getting results against, maybe draws against premiership teams, and we think we're world beaters, and then it goes tits up in the league, to be honest. So, no, I mean, it's clear we maybe struggle for goals, but we had a lot of young players playing those games, getting really good minutes and certainly impressing. We're still working, Daniel Church, our left back, and Bryden, one of our first choice centre halves, have both been injured, so they're coming back to fitness. So try not to read too much into them. It's been a couple of individual errors, I think, from what I've read, that have cost goals. And again, they should be fairly easily ironed out. So try not to read too much into it. I just hope that the fans do turn out on Saturday, despite the pre-season results, and really back the team, because it will be a big crowd. Dons have a good travelling, so hopefully they do turn out and back the team.
Yeah, it certainly seems there is a large travelling support going to this game, obviously with the kind of restricted away support for the game against East Kilbride, with that game being played at K Park. Again, for some, an opportunity to tick off a new ground this weekend. Unfortunately, my bank balance is still recovering from the trip to Germany. Not that I've mentioned I've been there enough. So game comes a bit too soon for that. But it'll be a first experience for Palmerston, of course, for Jimmy Tilleen as well, the new manager. Does our lack of game time over the course of pre-season, Peterhead, our only kind of game against opposition, we've had a bounce game at Cormac Park. Jimmy didn't reveal if that was against anybody, and an internal game when the Dons were in Portugal. Does that give you any confidence at all that, Queen of the South have had minutes under their belt compared to Aberdeen, or even the fact that it is a new manager and Aberdeen are going to be trialing a new system, a new style for the first time against Queen of the South, albeit maybe you guys doing the same under Peter Murphy.
No, absolutely. I think the lack of football for Aberdeen definitely benefits Queen of the South. You'd like to think Aberdeen, as professional as the players and management team are, you'd assume they'll be less match fit given the fact they've been in for pre-season. I think it's about a fortnight less or fortnight fewer than Queens have been in for pre-season. So, and also obviously with question marks around Miovski's future, and obviously he's not trained as much. He missed the first week at Induk as well. That's serious firepower that Aberdeen won't have up front. So you'd like to think that will benefit Queens. I think Queens have been in training since like the 10th of June or something. So I'll be more than a month since Queens started training as a team at Palmerston as well. That certainly gives me hope. But obviously it means nothing come Saturday, because I'm sure Aberdeen players will be up for it as much as Queens players will be.
Yeah, and I guess you touched on Bojan Miovski. Duke, of course, not featured really in pre-season at all. That is a serious amount of firepower that the Dons have, and where we are going into this game, there are obvious fears for any Queen of the South fan looking ahead to the weekend. Is there any other players or kind of areas of the pitch that you look at this Aberdeen side from last season, because we haven't exactly, changed too much so far over the summer, that gives you massive causes for concern based on what you've seen from Queens last season and Aberdeen?
I think the main concern for me is that where it's going to be hard for Queens to win and to break Aberdeen down, for me, just comes from the experience throughout the Aberdeen team. Queens, we've signed some older players, a bit more experience this year, but we tie it back to match fitness, which can always be an issue in these early games. But the experience throughout the Dons team, they're seasoned pros, they've been around the block, a few of them, they know how to come to grounds like Palmerston and grind out results. It might not be pretty, but they've done it. They've made a career living out of it. You look at the defence for Aberdeen, they're all mid-20s, maybe early 30s. Shinnie in midfield's the same. As I say, the one saving grace is there is no Miovski. There probably won't. Well, there might be Miovski, but I would doubt it. I'm not sure about Duke. Obviously, I don't think Peter Ambrose made it to Portugal either, so I'm not sure if he'll feature. So you can just about predict how the front four of Aberdeen will look. But it's just that experience. Shinnie in midfield is just going to keep things ticking, protect that defence well. And as I say, we've struggled to break teams down in pre-season with much weaker defences than what Aberdeen will come to Palmerston with. So that's it. But you never know. It's a nighttime game with a decent crowd, live on TV, first game of the season. If there's ever going to be an upset, I think it'll be on Saturday.
Yes, and I know you're eager to mention it. There is, of course, history between the two sides and cup upsets as well. So I'm sure they'll be looking for a repeat of that obviously famous in your history day out at Hampden, infamous in our case. But funny you mentioned about Miovski. I do actually think he will feature. The fact you mentioned, he's not maybe had that extra week in pre-season that the rest of the team had. I think this is an opportunity for him to continue building his fitness. Some fans might not agree, but it's also an opportunity to keep him in the shop window if he scores. Peter Ambrose has been training with Scott Anderson in the under-18s, despite not going to Portugal. So I think he's certainly a player that fans will be keen to see what he can offer. Obviously, of course, we've got the game in Peterhead. We're recording this Monday lunchtime. We're both at work, so apologies. So there is some external noise from the crane beeping away at the quayside. So there are players that will be excited to see. Even you mentioned defence, of course, Gavin Malloy, who we signed from Shelbourne. I'm looking forward to seeing how he lines up. Will he line up with Angus MacDonald? Will he line up with Richard Jensen? There's lots of little kind of key caveats, I guess, from this Aberdeen side to excite us. But equally, as you've mentioned, it's an evening game under the lights, big crowd, TV camera, new manager, different sort of pressures. It's easy enough, doing the job on the training pitch. How does that convert to when the team, actually take the field in competitive action?
But I think that the real interesting thing for me from an Aberdeen point of view is how they will adapt to what seemingly is a brand new style of play for the Dons, totally different. And they'll have had about 4 weeks or so maybe before the game happens working with Jimmy. So that's, that's going to be a really interesting thing to see how they've adapted to that and how they put that into practice, as you say.
Yeah, absolutely. I think I read the article that the Evening Express did where one of the training sessions the players weren't even allowed to pass the ball backwards. So that'll be a really interesting kind of
Yeah.
way to see. But of course the game is at Palmerston. It's been 12 years since the Dons visited Queen of the South. Of course, recently retired Andy Considine getting the winner in that Scottish Cup replay. We've mentioned the upset as well. First game of the group always, stands either side in good stead for the rest of that group campaign. What would be the hopes for a Queen of the South fan for not only the game, but the group as a whole, Finlay?
I think the aim is always qualification, albeit, this is a really, really tough group. East Kilbride, they're a Lowland League team, but they've got full-time players and operate on a fairly healthy budget. They're a really, really good side, a good footballing side. So them, Airdrieonians, good season last season. Dumbarton just promoted in Aberdeen. It's going to be a hell of a tough group. But you would be looking at second or worst case scenario, third place. The financial implications of qualifying for a team like Queens are massive. If we get through to the last 16, and even if you get beat, it's £60,000, which is huge for Queens. And that's before taking into account the fact that you might get an away tie at Ibrox or Celtic Park, which will come with huge benefits too, just through ticket money. So the higher up we can finish, the better. But being realistic, I think some good performances, some minutes into some players' legs, and a couple of results would be a good group for us. We've in the last couple of seasons. Last year we drew with Motherwell, beat Queen's Park, finished unbeaten, and then lost our first league game of the season. And the year before that, we finished ahead of St Johnstone, ahead of Airdronians, and started the league season with a loss again. So I'm not reading too much into this campaign. And just on your Andy Considine point, because this is one of my favourite stats of all time. He's played Queen of the South 4 times as a Dons player, and he's scored 4 goals. He is an absolute nightmare for us to play. So I am thrilled he's retired.
Well, I'm just ashamed Jimmy might not manage to coax him out of retirement and sign a 1-game contract just in case we need goals. But Finlay, absolute pleasure chatting to you and getting a bit of perspective on the opposition this weekend. Really enjoyed the chat. And if you have enjoyed the chat with Finlay and the rest of this episode and been watching on YouTube, remember to leave a like on the video, comment your thoughts down below on anything that's been discussed on the episode or the game itself this weekend. If you've been listening on audio as well, remember it's free to follow us on any audio platform wherever you're listening to the podcast. And until next week, we'll be reviewing, of course, all the action from the game at the weekend and looking ahead to Game 2 of the League Cup group stages against East Kilbride. Thanks very much for tuning in.